Good afternoon. We start now another panel of the Brazil UK Forum. My name is Fabrício Bonestini Almeida, and I study public policies and social policies in the London School of Economics in LSE, United Kingdom. The program is on our website on YouTube or Instagram, and this panel is also being broadcast by Folha de São Paulo newspaper. For those of you who don't know, this forum is a plural forum that has as a goal to debate the central themes that are relevant to Brazil and United Kingdom. And the theme is the future starts in the present. And the theme is important because it's important to think about the future, debate the future of Brazil that goes through serious crisis. And in this debate, we have several panelists of the most relevant caliber, but this event wouldn't be possible without the support of fundamental partners, Idea Big Data, Haddad Foundation, and the law firms PGMBM and Matos Filho and Natura Co. And all of those who have engaged in organizing a number of debates to debate the present and the future of Brazil. We are going to debate economy, and apparently it's a technical theme that oftentimes is not accessible to the majority of the population. And we have selected panelists that have been debating the country for a long time. I have the pleasure of announcing Nati Finances. She's an administrator, and she has a YouTube channel in financial education, and particularly for lower income people. Nati is amongst the people who in 2020 was in the Forbes magazine for people below 30 years and the Fortune magazine. And she has published a book recently called Budget Without Failure. Esther Dweck is got a PhD in economy from the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, where she debates issues regarding public economy. Esther was the secretary of federal budget between 2015 and 2016, and she has recently published an important book, which is the book Economy Post-Pandemia or Post-Pandemics, Dismantling the Myth of Fiscal Austerity and Building a New Economic Paradigm. Last but not least is Eduardo Moreira, who's got a degree from Catholic University of Rio de Janeiro, and got a degree from San Diego State University. He's the co-founder of the Institute Knowledge Set Free, and he has published in 2019 Inequality, Path for a More Social, a More Just Society, and the Economy of Desire, the farce of the neoliberal thesis. So first, I'm going to tease you. I would like to thank Esther, Eduardo, Nati. It's great to have you here. And I'm going to ask you then to speak for 5 minutes in your introductory remarks, and we are going to follow on after that. And we know that Brazil is not in a very stable situation, not from an economic standpoint of public health, and we've reached over 460,000 dead people, over 14 million unemployed people, and an expansion of poverty last year. And in August of last year, until February 2021, we had 90 million people in poverty, and now we have 27 million in poverty. And this has been increased with by the increase of prices, and beans are more expensive, meat, fuel, everything. So then, in light of the loss of income and a population that is facing some type of food insecurity, nutritional insecurity. 19 million people had to endure hunger in some way or another. So the question then that we need to address is the $1 million question. How are we going to move out of this crisis? What are the possible solutions? What can how can we help the Brazilian society grow economically and look at the future and have more hope? Nati, I would like to start by you. What has been the dialogue with your public and how do you see the future from now on, Nati? Thank you. I would like to thank for the invitation, and I'm very happy to be here with wonderful guests so that we can have this such important conversation about such difficult moment in terms of how we may improve such difficult moment. And what I have realized in my public in the beginning of the pandemic is that I talk about personal finances. How can you organize yourself financially, even if you don't have a lot of money? And my public was going through difficulties and was looking for income. They lost income, they lost their salaries, uh, small businesses that were shut down, then the entrepreneurs that couldn't continue with their business. And what I felt the need to speak about was not in terms of how to organize with very little. How can you then help or apply for emergency aid? So I talked about this emergency aid and the importance of its approval. And it was actually at the Pernambuco State is a university is that the emergency aid, the importance of this emergency aid for low income people who needed this money not only in order to they needed the money to feed themselves. And how are these people going to have access to this money so that they can pay their bills? 600 reais for each people, 1,200 for two people last year, and it helped many people. But now we've got the reduction of this aid, and last year people were arguing that it was an expense. Paulo Guedes stated that people were going to be accommodated, is that people were starving, as I have just stated. So how can people then have a minimum pay their bills? They need to buy gas. So then that's why I state it is important until the end of the pandemic for low income families, they need this emergency aid to secure food. They were able to pay a few bills, but it doesn't pay for even 30% of the basic set of food items. So this is not an expense and people are not going to be accommodated. People need this money. And some people are a bit, some of them are able to, were able to, people need to understand these needs. They all, the whole time people are saying it's just to be an entrepreneur. Some people are trying to open a business because of their needs, and I see that the path today, I'm going to leave it up to some of my guests to speak about this. But at the moment, we need to continue the emergency aid. It needs to be increased because it doesn't put all the basic bills, but this has been important that the parties were struggling in order to have this bill approved. Thank you, Tati. And I'm going to invite there. How do you evaluate the decisions made by the government? Do they protect the population at the present, and do they create the conditions for future and in order to secure an income in general? Mm, First of all, it is a pleasure to be here. I was here in this forum, I believe maybe the 1st of the 2nd. It was a very important debate at that time. We were still under the impression that the economy was beginning to recover slowly. And I think that the debate that we had there, we continue to engage in this debate here. There was also this need to take back the economic growth and income distribution and the inclusion of the population. And I think this is what we need. I agree with this analysis. The first most urgent thing is that when we are in the midst of a pandemic, it reflects on the population, ensuring the economy for this population. We may uh, activate the economy from traditional perspective. And the only way of doing that is to maintain emergency aid. There's no reason for this emergency aid to be discontinued in the end of last year. And as we are focused in governmental decisions, they decided that the pandemics were going to end in December 2020. And then the proposal for the budget did not include funding for health care and vaccines and emergency aid. So there were no mention in this budget, and it was even more reduced. And this is part of this fiscal restriction. And there has to be a great institutional change. You cannot maintain the rules that were stipulated last year. They could have postponed the decree about a public calamity, and thanks to a strong pressure of civil society in the campaign for renewal, we developed a program that was successful. It's not by chance that we had a drop and we didn't have an increase in hunger last year, but all of that ended in December 30, and hence the government utilized the need to take back to this emergency aid. We know very well what happened. A very large number of people who died, and yet the government was blackmailing the population in terms of having a constitutional term so that the fiscal rules were going to be even more strict and provided a very tiny emergency aid. So a single mother now earns 300 reais, 350 reais, while last year it was over 1,000 reais. And we know it's not enough because this income does not allow people to have the right to survive during the pandemic. So in short term, the best way to ensure this income is to ensure resources so that the government will need to ensure this program in order to support formal workers and unemployment benefits. But these are emergency interventions, but then next year when we believe that the population is going to be vaccinated, we need to then reuse channels that have been frozen in terms of not investing in the development of the country and in policies and interventions that would increase job offers and invest in basic sanitation and public investments in structures that could generate jobs and we could then combine the income generation program and take back the economy once we are able to control the pandemic in fostering economic development. And before asking Eduardo, I wanted to ask Antonio Lacerda. He had a little technical problem and he asked us to move forward. Antonio has a doctoral degree in economy from the University of Unicamp. He's currently the director of the economy at São Paulo PUC University. Antonio is a member of the DEP and the main partner of the AC Lacerda Associated Consultants. So what are the possible solutions for this crisis? How do you see that? Eduardo first and then you. Hello. First of all, I would like to salute my friends Esther, Nas Finanças, and to say that they have just left here in my library. We are fixing the second floor of my house, and they left here a book that I had forgotten in my room. It's the book by Antonio Correia de Lacerda, The Myth of Austerity. The book has just arrived while we were here in this live, and I think it's very important that we have this type of conversation because the economy comes to us in two ways. It's either what the banks do, which is insensitive, in which they just think about Excel spreadsheets that do not correspond to the lives of people, a meeting of CEOs in which major investment firms and aside next to him an economist that was directing the National Treasury, and they stated the results this year was great because even during the death rates were high and the economy was strong, and they were talking about debt like numbers. And we ended with 85% of public debt. And people listen to it, and people kind of accept that as though, well, 85% is the bigger, the better. How are we going to go through this pandemic? We spend no money, and we are going to have 70% of PIB debt. Who is stating that 85 is better than 100%? If you have this 50% in an extraordinary period, you may provide dignity to a number of people, as Anaki and Esther has stated, to maintain people safe in a period when they are adapting to the pandemics that have hit your country. But this is the approach regarding the economy within this financial system. And when you see the news in a portal, for a short period of time, there's no death, and people end up just not getting involved with that. And here we have a chance in which people may uh, um, engage with the concept, but I think there has to be this aspect in which people a more human approach. And the economy is a means, is an organization of ideas and concepts in order to help us manage our homes. Economy, it has to do with the Greek word, the root, it's the economy of the home. So in order to generate wealth, we need to redistribute it amongst ourselves so that all of us may live in dignified, healthy, and strong ways, individually and collectively. And the truth is that Brazil nowadays, in that sense, with the economic chaos from the etymological sense of the word, what we have now, 100 over 100 million people who have had some face difficulties to place food on their plate. There's 20 million people who are currently enduring the disease of hunger. There's the daily issue, and we have very high unemployment rates, and we have people who are stating, "Well, I'm happy because the PIB, the gross internal product, has increased." But how can you be happy? You are hungry. Is this gross internal product reaching you, coming to you? Are you eating it at night? Is it like beef? They developed a study that 82% of the wealth is going into the hands of the 1% of the population, and the rest of the population inherited 0% of this profit. So these worlds have income that are completely different. And when we look at the averages, we have a completely unreal notion of what's happening. So all of these averages, like inflation, if you look at inflation for rich people and for poor people, their losses for poor people have been so much higher. But when we see the average, some of the averages are even worse, like the average income during the crisis increased, but did not, because a lot of people walked away. So those who had less than the income average, there was a mess of salary, the addition that everything that was being received, but who was talking about that? So I'm going through several concepts quickly, and this is a chance for us to move away from the headlines, this the newspaper headlines, and the average that people receive, like the economy is better or bad or good because of the PI, the gross internal product, and the economy is doing well. We did not need to have any of these averages, and look at the situations of people. There's more people in the street. Are there more people hungry? Are there more unemployed people? Then the economy is in bad shape. And then we are going to look at elements to establish the correct diagnosis, and then think about prophylaxis and think of ways of correcting those issues. But you have to verify that we've gone through a chaotic economic moment in which, for us to walk away from this, we had to talk about redistribution of wealth, because there's no other mathematic solution for countries that have one of the highest inequality indexes in the world. And we also need to talk about generating wealth that stay in the country. We may not go into another cycle in which Brazil, by Brazil, sugarcane, mining, coffee, and now we have the soy cycle and everything happening, and we then extract our wealth and we send it out of the country, and we do not create mechanisms so that this wealth stays here and builds the community. We have an interesting concept, which is community well-being and building wealth in the community. So we have more time to talk about all of these concepts. And before moving forward, I'm going to take this opportunity to ask the public to participate and engage with the debate, and not only around this issue of the economy, engage with it. So this hard question, how can we then go out of this crisis in the next years? How do you evaluate the scenario? You have 5 minutes, please. Thank you for this invitation. It's an honor to be here with you, Eduardo Momero. You are people who have been with me in several events, and NASA I'm meeting today, but it's a pleasure. And in fact, this issue that has been presented in terms of opportunities of working and possibilities of solutions for the crisis, what has uh, Eduardo has stated, we also live some paradigms in Brazil, which I call the lack of choices. For example, the false dichotomy between you either being a champion from the agribusiness and then an industrialized country. Few countries may do that. And Brazil is one of them because we have a large scale economy and we have territories and natural resources and we have an industrial tradition. We have lived the process of industrialization for several decades, but that has been intensified. But we also maintain the largest system in Latin America. We have this production and the reparations that we have in terms of extraction activities and secondary in terms of services along with that. In fact, it's only possible for this preparation because what prevails now is the concept of integrated chain. And the challenge is, of course, to take advantage of these comparative issues that not accommodating them is to take the next steps for this productive chain so that you may broaden the complexity, the aggregated value, and the valuing of our condition. And Brazil has all of those resources, but where is the mistake? The mistake is to think that this is only going to happen through the market. No, it doesn't work. And this is the false dichotomy between the state and the market. It is not the state or the market, either or. It's both. All of the international approaches talk about the fundamental role of the state that has a role in the strategies and interventions and to operate as a service provider, but to regulate and to provide. It may eventually privatize, but the simple transfers of activities to the private sector is not a solution. It actually may be a bigger problem because you are going to create monopolies, you're going to create oligopolies. And in the same ways, it's a major contradiction if you understand that you have to talk about the external market or the international market. In Brazil, has these characteristics in which we may then have our national basis for production in aiming at the international market in several segments. And in that sense, this we have an asymmetric relationship. Brazil has been one of the five, six the strongest economies in which there are companies investments in the country. We're talking about exportation, generation of jobs and income. It's not compatible with this uh, good development that you have in terms of an integration of values to supply the weaknesses and to take advantage of the strengths are wonderful and at the same time qualify our international insertion. I see that our government has made a big management mistake. But for example, joining the ministries of planning and the ministry of industry and exterior commerce and ministry of work and labor have created under the argument of rationalization a huge monster and has lost uh, several economic agents, workers, and business people who need, of course, to build this foundation they had in the market. And it is uh, turning small, these economic policies, and without precedent. And what are the arguments? You currently have a secretariat, a subsecretariat, which is absolutely disempowered and absolutely headless in terms of a technical team. And worse than that, with this government, they do not critique the projects of a nation state. So this is barbaric because the reductionism in terms of the role of economic politics, of the denial of policies of development, and these discourses, they are very emphatic in terms of fiscal adjustment because it feeds in itself, because this fiscal adjustment predicts income. And if you simply cut off these expenses in times of crisis, you are not going to induce economic activities. You are not going to invite private investment, and the role of the state is important, is crucial in this crisis. We have created self ties, the constitutional amendment that has an addiction of origin, which is comparing macroeconomy with the domestic economy, because for a corporation does not have any other alternatives than cutting its expenses. But the state, its attributions in the constitution, the state has a very relevant role in inducing, provoking an articulation in terms of multiplying public policies and investments. So in conclusion, this is a trap that is present in terms of this false option, and we are talking about the political economy of economic policies. So the theme then I would like to state, I'm going to ask Esther to comment on this because we talk about the constitutional amendment 95 and this establishing a limit to budget expense to the budget. So Temer government has harmed investments in health and technology in terms of then delivering public policies of rights. So how made these tributary policies harm the economy in Brazil? Thank you. I believe it is important to talk about this. We in Brazil already have an overlapping of fiscal rules. They have become relevant in the 90s in the context where there was a reduction of the state and the change of the role of the state in the economy. The only fiscal policy had as goal the sustainability, which would be the major index in terms of providing stability. And the state then was distributing wealth and income and jobs for people, and in terms of providing public services for free and with high quality to the population. All of these things that were relevant have lost its role in terms of this notion that the state's role was to maintain the public debt under control. Then we have this uh, rule of this legislation that has a specific rule in terms of primary results, but then there were then, I'm not going to get into details about this rule, but in 2016, there's been a realization that it was necessary to have a more proactive role from the state. We then realized that Brazil, like the rest of other countries, started to then implement rules that are unprecedented in history. And then the whole world has the rule. Which country has the rule in which primary fees, even which is frozen? There's no precedent in the world. There will be rules for expenses on some types of fees, but none are dealing with real growth. Minimal fees that are for very serious cases, which is a state of calamity
like imposed by the pandemic, then we do hope that we don't need to have another calamity in order for this money to be spent. And this rule then that determines the state of the size of the state, it determines the reduction of the state because primary expenses with security, health, and job generation, all the roles developed by the state public services, it's determined that it's not going to grow. There will be no growth because it's unconstitutional, which means that you're going to be reducing the role of the state and then reducing its ability to provide services. And then people who don't have any protection and confronting racism and violence against women in several realms in which their culture, but even health and education that had a constitutional protection. In this amendment, this protection was decreased. And then we observe that we have pre-pandemic were already decreasing in terms of prior circumstances and for education, not only for institutions of higher learning, but also basic education that have a part that is protected, but school buses, food in schools, all of that is affected by this budget cut. Then we start to realize that the state was in a central issue regarding technologies in order to provide some numbers. In the three first years of 17, 18, 19, so a reduction of 38% of this budget. Basically, then research in Brazil is being crashed down. Science and technology and health, then, these areas were completely debilitated, and it's not possible to have them retrieved quickly. And in conclusion, I believe that if we were to think about a project for taking back the economy, we need to be able to, the whole framework of fiscal intervention so that the state may distribute income and provide quality services and to ensure the generation of jobs. The state has to do all of that and always improve its fiscal circumstances, which is the opposite of what's happening because what we see now is an attempt of a self-destroying fiscal adjustment, increasing inequality, and it creates problems for public education. So if we don't rethink that, we are going to suffer the consequences. So when we talk about these policies, I depended on the food that was provided by my school. I went to a public institution, and people feel that as part of the opportunity to have access to these services, there's a very important thing that when we study, which is something that people are requiring employment benefits and for the workers class, and how do you see this low self-esteem in interaction with your public? Are people seeking for credit next year? And in terms of percentages, these people been able to achieve personal credit? How has it been the impact of these configurations in the self-esteem of your public? About this issue of unemployment, since last year, many other things were happening, but last year just intensified. And what I have realized also is that this salary reduction, actually, we are going through, since May 31st, there has been people who had to return their emergency aid. If they had told people that it was just a temporary arrangement, people then had to return this money. And I think that this issue of unemployment what people have been enduring. What I say for people of low income people is that they have helped open businesses or have selling hot dogs or selling something in order to complement their income. And then there's another difficulty, not only depression and the psychological aspects of people, but there's difficulties for these people to have access to credit because listening to a government who is stating that if entrepreneurs are able to fulfill a lot more than small entrepreneurs, than big entrepreneurs, in small business and great enterprises, they are not able to maintain their employees. In order for us to organize anything, nothing. So what I have also realized in my conversations with them, talking about being uh, spending limits, I think that message that I received that they were going through these difficulties and she also came from a public school and she was trying to sell a few things so that she could complement their income because they could complement their income because of unemployment. So all of that affects not only the financial health of people, but also the psychological aspect because they are undergoing difficulties. You can't pay your bills, you don't have access to governmental support. So what I see is that it's not enough. Until when are we going to need to have for true that Brazil is starting to remember a quick news uh, that is brief and because they are working. So let's just, if you don't talk about the economy, don't make announcements about it. But they have the power, these people, to interrogate, to question. So it's a bit difficult then. Until when are we going to need the social security reform, workers reform for Brazil to improve? This is the question that I would like to bring. And what I have here, until when are we going to need? There's a line that I hear since I was a child. Brazil is the country of the future. It is a promise that is never fulfilled. So I would like to invite Eduardo. Eduardo, during this crisis of the pandemic, some countries like the United States and European Union and United Kingdom and Japan, the state invested heavily in containing the impoverishment of the population, protecting the market and small and big companies. How do you see this entry of the state, intervention of the state during the crisis in the United States? Biden has organized a package, a financial package in order to protect national businesses and support the economy. How do you see that? And there's also more taxes are going to be charged to big fortunes in order to provide support and then help the crisis in long and medium term. So people think there's a silver bullet. The solution is to have to fine and to have fees to big fortunes. Of course, we should have a more fair tributary regime, but one of the things that will happen with this adjustment is to have taxation for big fortunes. But going back to your question, I think it's important to understand the following. The logic of the economic process is a logic that involves three phases: investment, the risk phase, and return. Investing means that you are going to use resources that you have today, which means, in other words, being more impoverished, meaning that something you don't have today, you won't have it anymore. And then you deal with the uncertainties of life. It's like planting corn. If you plant corn, you are more impoverished because of your efforts to dig and the water that you use. But then it might not work. There might be a heavy rain and a bird may just eat everything, and this business might not work. But if it does, you then have your corn, and you're wealthier than before. What is important, however, that every time this uncertainty increases, what happens with investment? It decreases. The biggest the uncertainty, the less people are willing to invest because they don't know what's going to happen with this risk period. So people are going to be poorer now. That's why last year the country became a record because people were saving, putting their money in a savings account before the crisis. The uncertainties were such, and I remember that there was a report by the World Bank that brings uncertainty indexes, this, that, and the other uncertainty, and they are at maximum point when investment is in its lowest. And what do? Let's do the following. Vamos, investing is not a good business for people. Let's decrease the interest so that people don't really earn anything. So if people are afraid and they leave their money there, they are not going to earn anything. But people continue without, because people invest, imagine that when we have interest, zero interest, so the scenario is to lose all your money. Is to lose 100%. That's why we have countries in which the income fees are null. So pay in order to guarantee you attempt to leave your money and withdraw less than ahead. Because since you are so afraid, the uncertainties of are affecting you. So when you have a scenario that added up to everything that happened before you have the pandemic, who is going to invest? Who is going to start this process? The truth is that nobody is going to start this process, but somebody has to unlock it now. Somebody has to generate wealth, because if there's frozen wealth and wealth that is not distributed, people will die and the economy is going to get into a collapse. But who may impose economic activities? The state is the only one that may impose. That's why we are charged impostos in Portuguese, taxes. Why is it called impost? Because it's an imposition by the government that the state makes. So in all this country, the state got in investment, and then it's not enough to have state investment. What Antonio has stated, the state has spent money. Imagine if we were to just think about a pipe, and the money then vanishes. No money that is in the hands of the state, but it's not going to be in the hands of one person. It's in the hands of physicians, oh my God, in terms of investments, and everything is going to end up in the hands of people. All the money is going to end up in the hands of someone, and there will be a legacy. And it's also this notion of digging a hole on the ground and there's no legacy, which is actually an expense from the government that he cares more about. That is going to end up in the hands of people who don't spend money, because these are very wealthy people and they don't spend it. And there is no legacy. People are going to provide these services for money. So paying this debt, there's wonderful professors here. So at every each one real that is paid for this debt, the economy shrinks every time there's then a 4.1 economic activity, because these people receive the money. They will go and buy meat in the market, and then they call and they ask for more meat, and the truck driver then stops at the gas station, and the gas station then pumps the gas and money multiplies. And it's important at the moment that the state spends money in the right places, leaving legacies that are important to him for him to eat, so that money may circulate from top below. If you then use the principle of evaporation, very little things are going to be absorbed by the system and the plant is going to die rotten. If you then, however, throw this water in its roots, then when you look at the impoverished layers of the population, these people who are suffering will be stronger and will be more robust, which is going to increase profits for corporations. But why isn't anybody doing that? And because then you are tipping the scale of power, and it's not only about maximizing profit, it's about maximizing power, particularly in societies such as the societies that have a history like Brazil. So another question we are going to then open to the public right afterwards. And I have a question that I have been grappling with. We have, as you have described, a productive chain that is linked to the agribusiness and mineral extraction of oil, but a large portion of the Brazilian population is employed in services, as service providers. So it's not like they have any type of particular professional training in technology. So how can we then, if we think about the future, think about technological innovations and attract this aggregated value for industries in the country, economies that are green economies that are sustainable, for example? When you think about that in terms of debating solutions for our ill or our problems, let's think about solutions. It is important that we have in mind, or we keep in mind, what moves investments. Investments are motors of the economy. They are the ones that provide the foundation for the economy, but also for private and public investment. But if we are not only talking about low interest, investments are moved by two main factors. First, the expectation of all of the demand. No businessman is going or entrepreneur is going to invest without a return, but we are talking about profit or the profitability that is expected. So then what happens is that you have a macroeconomy, a body of policies, macroeconomic policies that do not induce the possibility of growth of this demand, that you are going to provide an answer fee to this system because the state has not fulfilled its part. And the second paradigm is this contradiction between the crisis and the growth of savings. Even if there's so many people who are unemployed and starving, we need to be reminded of something that is fundamental in Brazil, which is our extreme inequalities. While 90% of the population, when they earn, it's enough for their subsistence. You have 10% of the population that concentrates over 50% of this income. So inequalities, extreme inequalities, then I think it's a mistake we haven't mentioned, as I the mistake that now, if savings accounts are have increased, you no longer need emergency aid. Income has increased in savings accounts for people who haven't traveled abroad, who haven't purchased a new car, but for those who live in subsistential conditions, whose income are in atrophy, looking for waiting and depending on emergency aid, they can barely survive. So then these aspects in integrated ways, and particularly the government may never stop its incomplete evolution in terms of ecology, and we coexist. One, what happens the most is what we technically call the unemployed ones. We are talking about over 40 million people, and that's frightening. But it's not the whole picture because you have 6 million people who are not looking for jobs. But it's not like because they don't want to work. It's because they don't envision a perspective of finding a job. And if you have 12 million people who are underemployed, they work a lot less than they could and are able to work. And adding it up, it's 33 million Brazilians. It's over the size of the population of small countries in terms of the unemployed population in Brazil. So if we want to talk about technology, we need to take advantage of our strengths. We are a country that have water in abundance. Obviously, if we were to talk about our natural resources and thinking about competitive advantages and taking advantage of the large majority of in terms of our historical experiences adjusted to new paradigms of 5G technology or 4.0 technology, and at the same time making viable the diversification of our activities and priorities with the domestic market or in terms of international insertion. And there's also the good international practices and theories and public policies that are registered in the literature. It's not only known for those who are in charge of the economic system in Brazil, who are stuck in old, and only the taking back of this trust is going to bring back the economic growth, which in the Brazilian case is a presupposition of development. Thank you, Antonio. I'm going to ask a question to Nachi. Do you, how do you consider as a YouTuber retaking the economic aspect that is closer to people in your work, in your daily life, establishing perhaps a less truncated dialogue? How do you see that within your project? I see that economy and it's an issue of power. If you understand what affects your money and the financial market and how it affects your lives when the actions and go up or down, and then it's geared towards something that is of their interest. You can interrogate when you learned about personal finances and the finances of the job market. You interrogate many things in looking and interrogating and questioning. So this work, people who work on YouTube and internet and talk about this in didactic ways, it helps people, low-income people and Brazilian people to understand that issue and interrogate with and question with some economists who are going to state why? Because I see it from a different perspective. And why is your way more adequate? Because when people then no longer want to talk about economy, it's because there's no interrogation. That's why I see it as important that we have more economists, more, we have more for everybody, for people to understand how it affects their money, how does soy arrive and how does it affect their money. Like I had an episode talking about banks and debt, and that these people who are in debt, they feel terrible about it. But how about the bank that charges 14% interest foremost. Why isn't anybody talking about that? That's why it is important to talk about this and to naturalize this conversation like we are doing here. Thank you, Nati. I'm very happy. I do admire your work. And now I have a question to Esther. In light of the impact of the economy due to the pandemic, do you evaluate that the basic income? How do you evaluate this debate about basic income? How would it help us in the future? I believe that this is a new dimension in Brazil in light of last year. I believe that one of the things that seemed to be strong was this notion that in Brazil people should have an income in order to, because they were born and they live here. And I think that it's an important debate in the digital world where we realize that this works, then you have less people in the job market and you need to ensure your income outside of the job market, but not in detriment to circumstances. Basic income needs to complement other interventions by the state, provided by the state. Although there are several nuances, but the majority agrees that it is a complement to other forms of state intervention that we already have in Brazil. For example, when you have access to public education and health, you have an income. You are then, these are services that are being provided to you for free. So supporting informal workers, we have a part of informal workers who have no access to direct interventions by the state. The emergency or the family support, I would call it, at least it's a way of ensuring and complementing their income in terms of providing services and ensuring certain structures through public means. And then you need to complement this income through other tools that could be a part and tend to be a part of this future. And then there's something that I would like to address here, which is the debate in terms of taxing, what we are going to do, have to do in the future as we see an economy that is going to be more robust and that is going to be work performed by machines and not by labor, we will have to think about the redistribution of this basic income in order to rethink about how this wealth and income is distributed through the economy, because we are talking about people whose only thing they have is their labor, and if they are not inserted in the job market, they won't be able to generate income. So these are important complementations in terms of how people have proposed. Bolsonaro had a proposal for basic income, which was in detriment to all other public policies, and then provide income to people and then just do what you need, then buy food, and you wouldn't have any other state support. So we need to think about this basic income as a complement. And because we are undergoing a process in which we see the precarization, or work is becoming more precarious, we need to think about ways of improving also in the job market so that we don't need to depend on this complementary income as a way of thinking about this basic income. Is to not at all think about it as the only way of state intervention, but for those who have defended it in the beginning. Thank you. It's very interesting to reflect about basic income as a complement. I've never thought about that. And then I'm going to share a question with Antonio, a question that is coming from the public. She is one of the voluntaries. And Antonio, how can we save Brazil from this eternal cycle of crisis? So there are factors, cyclical factors. The pandemic is a type of less cyclical type of crisis, but how do you see these crises? And how can we then create a way of softening these crises? My understanding is that we need to change the goals in terms of decision making in politics, economic politics. We should be dealt with as the public policies of the economic policies. And the distortions that I have pointed out in terms of public expenses and interest taxes or interest fees. So you would have then a favorable scenario for the generation of income and movement. So what happens, we need to redirect these political economic politics to their basic principles, which is to improve the lives of people. But not only are we talking about a technical decision, the alternatives that are presented by specialists are go through a process of decision making. And this is very important because just imagine the country that is a democratic country in pieces because you have elections. But look at what happened in 2018, for example. I'm not going to go into this whole debate about political and judicial circumstances, but there's one specific aspect that affects what we are discussing. The president of the republic was elected, and he did not have a governmental program, and he ran away from debate, and he turned into third party what the management of the economy, and nobody knew what that meant. So, and the vision of public economy, not only through elections themselves, but also with a broad debate in society in terms of the alternatives that are offered in order to break this vicious cycle that leads us into crisis in terms of public expenses, but also debating alternatives. And one of the best moments to do that is when you have general elections. But in order to do that in society, it demands from those candidates that have their plans, they need to have a governmental plan in order for us, in order for the debate to be deepened so that we can debate it. Otherwise, we are going to go through an only test. It's an economic policy, as I stated before, that is small and it's restrictive. It's not creative, and that only favors the so-called those who live with or in profiting from speculation with no income, no income generation, no job. So the choices of economic policies, it is a determining factor, but also the absence of a project. If we don't have a project that is broadly debated and with the whole society, we are going to be hostages of stagnation, of unemployment and precarious conditions, and all of the distortions, the social distortions that we have in Brazil being worsened. Another question that is coming from the public, and I'm going to show you, Eduardo, how then this lack of a
clear economic policy from the government, how do you evaluate that uh, this plan that doesn't seem to exist seems should be mitigating the impacts on vulnerable populations? The pandemics have had an impact for on women and peripheral populations. What kind of plan could then mitigate this impact, addressing these particular sectors of the population? This is a very good question because a plan that should be credible and well elaborated, it could have a great uh, impact. But just imagine, first of all, a fully elaborated plan. When we started to then have this new government and this Bolsonaro and his Ministry of the Civil House, who is a military man, the contradictions of this government, they presented a plan pro-Brazil or something like that, and they said it was going to be the solution for Brazil to move away from an economic crisis and low growth. And they introduced this program, and the Ministry of the Economy is not there. He's not there for this economic plan introduction. In the first page, we have three children with blue eyes and blonde hair that came from Sweden in a picture that they didn't even pay for. But then there's 7 pages of PowerPoint. And then I don't know if Sarah remembers that this PowerPoint, 7 page PowerPoint, that if any intern would do that, and then that's going to how growth is going to be. We are here in this little bar, and these bars are going to grow, and the next stages are going to be debated. So there was nothing. So just imagine when you elaborate a plan of that nature, and there's a company thinking, there's then someone saying, should I shut down my company or should I broaden? Or should I expand it? Should I buy cement and whatever it is? If you look at that plan, and the minister of the economy is not there, they state, I'm going to close my business tomorrow. And then if there's an economic plan, once we sit down and we debate with several sectors of society, after debating with workers and corporations and business people and made it possible through a structure of events and institutions and public-private partnerships in whatever way it could be structured. And then it sits down and introduces and shows where the resources are coming from, deadlines, and where these distributions are going to be made in different regions of Brazil, how it's going to be used for labor, for services. The next day, whoever is the owner of a cement company, I am going to hire people because I know there will be a demand for my cement. People who craft pieces, when they set up a new plant within the cement factory, um, workers have to hire more people, people who produce, who are part of the civil construction. Then there is a domino effect and there is a multiplication of this small governmental program that might be 50 million, 100 million, and then it multiplies to 300 million and so on and so forth because you have a plan that is doable, that is feasible, that is credible, and that starts this process. And this is what Antonio and Esther mean to the state directing and taking direction to lead us into growth. The majority of people don't even remember that plan because it was something like a delirious plan. And then we have
the wolf and the kid. And then when the wolf finally eats this kid, nobody's going to see this wolf coming. This government has no credibility. Let's talk about the fact that the last research by Datafolha, less than 3 years after his election, 51% of Brazilians do not believe in anything of what the president states, does not believe anything he says, and it's Datafolha stating it. It's not my opinion. It was a research. And so how can you then, a government that presents this type of plan, how are you going to induce growth? It's really important to have a plan, but not only to have a plan and an idea. You need much more than that. You need structure. It needs to be credible. And one of the things that leads a plan to be credible is to be debated with broader society. Thank you, Esther, your brief opinion, and then we should go into our final considerations. Esther, very briefly, how do you evaluate that? Elaborating a plan and the credibility of the and how we retake growth. What has been said here, I believe that there is a plan of destruction, of course, where you, it's not by chance that in the midst of the pandemic, there's a change, there's a new PEC, a new plan legislation that is linked to fiscal issues in order to have administrative uh, cuts in order to preserve the quality of public employees. But the plans are plans of destruction of a sovereign country in terms of interventions of the government. So what we need is a plan along the lines of what has been stated here. I think that people who are participating, we are talking about the quality of the lifestyles of the population. 99% of the population, or even 99.9%, that has nothing to do with the plan that is in course. And I think that the state has to be then ensuring the good, better life conditions. And we know that people are now, a majority of the population didn't have good life conditions prior to that. So there's been setbacks and there's no perspectives of way and ways out aside from crafting a national plan that brings the reduction of inequalities and improvement of life conditions, focusing on the population. That's what we need and that we do not see. And it has to do with the circumstances of the state, a state that ensures income, only the income for 0.1% of the population. And we need to have a debate. If we have a debate next year, it's going to be an important moment for reflection so that we can rethink where we are going. I think that's the role, all of the three of us, each one of us in our areas of intervention, which is to democratize knowledge. If we don't involve uh, economic issues as part of our debate, the population has no references for understanding. And I think it's fundamental to be able to do that. Thank you, Esther. And then in the sense of the importance of a public debate, and I would like to invite you to, for your final considerations and so that we can conclude your final remarks, please. With very much 2 minutes because we are running out of time. So having this conversation and talking and understanding always. I hope you have also enjoyed it. And for those of you who want to know more about my work, my name, my social networks are Net Finances. I have a book that is being launched this year. It's Budget Without Failure. If you want to get organized financially with no income, podcast with Net Finances. And every Friday, I have recorded with Eduardo, and I invite Esther and Antonio. So the more people we have talking about that, the better. Thank you for the forum for inviting me. Thank you. Antonio, your final consideration. It's been a pleasure to be here establishing this dialogue with you, Fabrício Sternassi and Edu Moreira. I believe we've dealt with fundamental issues here and remembering that what differs in terms of project of power, the power of a group, which is different from the project that we have here, because if it's broadly articulated by several authors, and I invite everybody, um, I am currently the president of the Federal uh, Committee for Economy. So we have been debates in terms of debating solutions for the Brazilian economy. I've had there with me, and I'm going to broaden this group so that we can broaden this debate. So the COFECON group, our activities and debates and discussion about the alternatives that lie ahead of us for the Brazilian economy. Thank you. Big hug to all of you. Eduardo, your final remarks so that we may conclude. I would like to thank Fabrício, Narciso, Antonio, and to talk about the importance of having these debates and that we continue to resist so that we can turn the page of this macabre government that we have in Brazil. It's not going to be an easy end, but it's better to have an ugly end than endless horror. Thank you, Eduardo. Esther, final consideration. Next, I had the privilege to speak in the last session. It's been a pleasure to be on this panel with Nessa and get to know her. Eduardo, I only been with him in live. Antonio, we've met in person a few times, and Fabrício as well. But I would like to congratulate the forum for organizing this panel. So the more sessions like this we have, people are already tired and people are already looking forward to getting to see each other in person. And the speed of vaccinations in Brazil, it's going to take a little while longer, but we could create spaces so that we may democratize this debate and think about a project for a nation, as has been stated. It's been an excellent debate. All of us have learned a lot. Thank you to all panelists, and we hope to have the opportunity to do this again soon. For you who are following from home, we are going to have more debates ahead of us. We would like to thank the team of volunteers who have made this forum possible and to bring this debate in order to debate the future and the present of our country. We would like to thank Today Films for the production and Dr. Raquel de Souza for translating into English. Schiller Marques, Emanuele Conceição, from Será Possível from the Libra interpretation sign language for social network and Folha de São Paulo. And this is it. And our motto is the future starts in the present. Follow the debate because we have a lot to talk about still. Thank you so much.